Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting a Battlemech in the colours of the Draconis Combine for Battletech by Catalyst Game Labs. Now when it comes to painting one of the canon colour schemes in this game, there's actually a huge amount of choice in each individual faction, so there's a lot to pick from here, but with this faction we decided to go for their signature red colour scheme, which means we're going to be painting a mech from the Sword of Light. Now the model we're going to use is a griffin which appears inside the beginner's box, but you can easily take all the methods and techniques that we're going to show you in this video and apply it to any mech that you might want to paint, be it something small like a locust or much bigger like a dragon. Now if you're new to the channel, be sure to like this video and why not subscribe to it too, and if you really enjoy the content that we've got here, then why not go over to duncanrhodes.com where we've got loads more videos just like this one. But without further ado, let's get painting. To paint your battle mechs in the Sword of Light colours, the first thing to do is to undercoat your miniatures. And for this colour scheme, what I've gone for is a grey undercoat, so I've used Mechanicus standard grey spray from Citadel, which is a great starting point for loads of different colour schemes, so a very useful primer to have. But in this case, what it's going to do is allow us to get our nice bright red very quickly. Now you can use any undercoat colour that you want here, so long as it's going to be good for that bright red. So all I'd do is avoid using a black or a white. But if you go for something that's a mid-tone like a grey like this or a red, it's an ideal starting point for what we need to do. And what we're going to do is start out by painting it with the bright red for this colour scheme. So for this, what I've picked out is Evil Sunz Scarlet, which is a lovely colour, ideal for this regiment. And to apply it, what I've got is quite an old brush here. This is a small dry brush from the Army Painter, which you can see has seen better days, but this is one of my older brushes that I keep around for these initial stages, because the first step here is just going to be to base coat the model with this red. It's going to be quite rough and quite quick, and having an older brush like this is ideal for it. So it's always a good idea to keep the old brushes for reasons like this. But with this, all we've got to do is just get some of the paint onto the palette, and as ever, thin it down with a little touch of water. We don't need loads here. There's a small amount, and be careful with a brush of this size because it can draw a lot of water very quickly. What we want to do is bring the paint down to around about this kind of consistency here. And once we've done that, it's just a matter of painting the mech entirely using this colour. So for this first stage, don't worry about fine details, just make sure the whole miniature is painted with this colour. Now when you put it on, you'll find because it's one of Citadel's layer paints, it's a little bit translucent, but don't worry about that. Just let it completely dry and apply a second thin coat once the first one is completely dry. Once you have that even red all across your mech, the next thing to do is to apply a wash over the miniature to give it some definition and some shading. And for this, what we need is a dark brown wash. So here I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade from Citadel, but any dark brown wash will do. So for example, you could use Strong Tone from the Army Painter. The choice really is yours. But to apply it, you should get hold of a larger brush that can apply it quickly over the whole model. So in this case, what I've got is a medium shade brush from Citadel. And for this kind of thing, I like to use a palette to control exactly how much I'm applying, because here we are going to be painting on quite a lot. Because what we want to do is to allow it to flow into all the recesses and all the texture, of which there's quite a lot on these miniatures, so an all-over wash is ideal for this sort of thing. So load up your brush with a good amount of it, and then all you got to do is paint it all over. So for example, if I start here on the leg, all I'm going to do is paint it on like this, and you can see straight away it flows into all those recesses and gives that definition. Now when you're applying this quantity of the paint onto the miniature, it will tend to flow down to the bottom of it and collect in some of the recesses. So for example, if I get quite a lot and put it onto its arm just here, you'll see it can flow down quite a lot and really start to pool around the hand. Now if you spot that happening, what you need to do is just move away the excess with your brush, just absorbing it away like a sponge, then moving it elsewhere onto the miniature to keep it fairly even, kind of like that. You're looking for this sort of this kind of finish before you leave it to dry. Now when you're applying this quantity, it will take quite a bit of time to dry, so be sure to leave the miniature for about 45 minutes before you move on to the next stage. The wash is now completely dry, and you can see it's given that definition to all of those armor panels on the mech, but it has darkened it down quite a bit and it's gone murky in some areas. So what we need to do now is just return to Evil Sunz Scarlet and neaten things back up again. And for a model like this with lots of textures on it, we can do it very quickly by doing a kind of two-stage method to it. And the first stage is going to be to dry brush this colour on. Now to do this, what you need is a smaller dry brush, and I've got a small dry brush here from Citadel with good springy bristles on it, so ideal for the kind of thing that we're doing here, because all you got to do is get a small amount of your paint on your brush, then get some tissue and use it to work the paint into the bristles whilst also removing the excess paint until you're getting this kind of appearance like this on the texture of the paper. And once you've got that, then all we need to do is start flicking this back and forth across the armour of the mech. So very lightly like this. So what will happen is it will mostly catch the edges, but it's also, if we just concentrate a little bit on a panel there like that, you can see it just fades away that splodge we just had. Now it's still slightly visible there, but you see it's very quick to start working away at those parts just to help ease them down a little bit. So we want to bring them down to around about that sort of stage just there across the entire body of the mech. Apply that dry brush until you bring the colour up to around about this point, and then we're ready to move on to the next stage, because if we carry on dry brushing like this to make it completely even, what we'd end up is a very rough texture on the armour panels, and also the brush would start to fall into some of the recesses and we'd lose some of that definition from the wash. So instead, what we're going to do now, still using Evilson Scarlet, is thinly layer it onto the flat armour panels. Because we've done that dry brushing already, this is going to be nice and quick, so we should fly through this straight away. Now to do it, all you need to do is switch to a medium-sized brush, and I have here a medium layer from Citadel. And with the paint on your palette, just thin it down to kind of this sort of point here. So you see it's a little bit more runny than what we normally go for, but it's very smooth as well. So it applies very nicely and quickly from the brush. And so with this, what we need to do is to look for the panels and apply it kind of towards the middle, because that dry brush you can see has kind of mostly put the colour strongly around the outer edge of each one of these. So we just need to look at the middle of these parts where it's a little bit darker, such as just there, and just apply it to that part there like that. And you see very quickly gets a nice neat panel on that area. Now whilst you're doing this, look for recesses and avoid them. So as we get to the middle of the chest here, you can see it's dark on either side. So I'm going to leave those darker lines still showing in those darkest areas, just concentrate on the middle just there like that. So now it's just a matter of doing this all across the mech's body. And as you can see, this is nice and quick and easy to do. And with that layering done, you can see now we have a much neater finish to that red, and also we've still got the definition from all the shading. It was also nice and quick and easy to do. But now what we can do is add a little highlight on there, and for this we can dry brush it once again. And what we need is a brighter red now. So for this, I'm going to use some Wild Rider Red. And to apply it, I'm going back to that small dry brush. And with this, just make sure it's completely dry before you start to use it, because with this, what we need to do is a very light dry brush onto it now. So a bit different to what we had in the previous stage. So for that reason, you can see I've got less paint on the brush, and I'm going to work it into the bristles once again, but this time I'm just going to make sure I remove even more of the paint until only a very small amount is appearing there on the tissue. And this time the motion when applying it to the miniature is a bit different. So rather than that fairly heavy dry brush we did last time where we were kind of working away at individual parts, this time instead it's a lighter flicking motion like this across larger areas. And by doing this and just working away at it, you'll start to see that lighter red starts catching those edges rather than the flat panels, and gives us a nice quick highlight on all these details. So now it's just a matter of doing this lightly across the entire mech to help those edges pop out a little bit more. And with that dry brush applied, you can see we've now got a nice highlight appearing on the red of the armour of the mech. And we are going to do an optional extra step on it later on to make it a little bit sharper. But before we do that, what we need to do is start marking in the other main colour that appears on the mech so that we don't go and highlight these parts unnecessarily. So this is going to be the silver. And for this, what you need is a darker silver colour. So I'm going to use some lead belcher for this, but any kind of darker silver like this will do just fine. And to apply it, go for a small brush now. And I'm using a small layer brush from Citadel, because here what we need is lots of control, because we kind of need to carefully manoeuvre amongst all of that red armor plating, because we're looking largely at the internal structure of the mech now, but also its weapons as well. So to help out with doing this, make sure you thin the paint down as ever, but just a little bit more than we have been doing so far. So around about this sort of point just here for this base coating stage. And then let's remove the excess paint off your brush by just twisting on your palette like that to get that nice point, and then ready to start looking for these areas. So first of all, for that internal structure, what we're mainly going to be looking at is things like joints. So for example, on its shoulder just there, we're looking at getting kind of the little internal bit that's visible just inside there. We just want to block that out there like that. Also, things like vents are a great place to block into. So there's this one just around here. So just going to get the little kind of grill part of it just there like that. So it's all these sorts of parts that are hidden away. Also on the side of the leg, there's kind of a joint just here. So we're going to get that as well. Anything like this. Now, in addition, this is a great colour to start to mark out some of the weapons too. So for example, on the PPC just here, I'm going to be painting the majority of it going all the way back along here. And also on the LRM launcher as well, going to look towards the front of it around here. Once you've blocked in all those silver details, which includes all the jump jets there on the back, the next thing to do is to apply a wash over this silver. And we need to start out here with a dark brown wash, so whichever one you used on the hull originally is the perfect one to go for here. So I'm going back to Agrax Earthshade for this. But the application this time is a little bit different because we need to focus it just on those silver areas. So stick to that small brush. I'm still using the small layer brush here from Citadel. And so with this, just get some onto the palette to draw from to control how much you have on your brush at once. And then all you got to do is neatly start applying it all over these silver details. So on that internal structure, it's just a matter of just taking your time, just washing it over those areas. And when you get to the larger parts, like on the weapons, for example, the PPC once again, just get a little bit more on your brush and just wash it over the entire area. With that brown wash completely dry, the next thing we're going to do is introduce a second tone of metal onto the miniature, because what this is going to do is give some variety to those silver areas and help some of them stand out. So things like the weapons, so they pop out on the tabletop. And to do this, what we're going to do is return to our original base coat of silver. So this time it's going to be Leadbeclher, and then we're going to apply a black wash over all the metal at once. Now what this is going to do is tone down all the really dark areas that we've got already and make them look particularly grimy, so great for that internal structure. And it's also going to do some shading on the brighter silver parts that we've got with a cleaner finish. So for this, you need a black wash. I'm going to use some Nuln Oil for this. But first of all, what we need is Leadbeclher, and to apply it, I'm still going to use that small layer brush. And it's really entirely up to you exactly what parts you pick out with this, but I find it's a good idea to pick out the weapons to help them stand out on the tabletop. So I'm looking at the PPC and the LRM launcher here. And what I'm going to do, starting out with that LRM launcher at the top, I'm going to go for the kind of outer side of it. So I'm going to leave the internal part darker. So I'm looking at this sort of area here. Now, whilst doing this, approach it kind of like that layering that we were doing earlier on the red. So we're looking for recessed areas, such as that little recess in the panel lines there. Just skip past it and carry on again on the other side like that to retain some definition on these areas, especially where it meets the parts that are going to stay darker. So on the PVC, we're looking at painting the barrel of the gun and leaving it darker as it meets the darker silver just at the base of it there. Once you're happy with those brighter silver details picked out, the next thing to do is apply a black wash over both tones of metal. So here I'm using Nuln Oil, and you can see I'm making sure it washes over both tones as I go along. And in addition, there's another thing to wash at this stage, and that is the canopy glass, just to set it up for later on. So be sure just to wash over all of this at this stage as well. The black wash is now completely dry too, and you can see it's now giving us those nice two tones on the metal. And so we can move on to the next step now, which is going to be to highlight the metal. And also, if you want to, we can do an extra highlight on the red armor as well. And so for this, for the silver, what we need is a lighter silver than we had for the base coat. So here I'm going to use some Iron Hand Steel. And then for the red, what we need is that lighter red that we used for the dry brush earlier. So in this case, it's going to be Wild Rider Red. But first of all, we need Iron Hand Steel. And to apply this, definitely go for a small brush now, because with this, what we're looking to do is to emphasize the sharper edges of these details on the silver parts. So for that, what you need is control. So first of all, you just need to make sure you thin the paint down correctly, a little bit more than with the base coat, down to around about this point here, because a key thing is to make sure it flows well from the brush. And you can always test it on the palette by just running some lines along like that. And you can see it's applying nicely onto the palette just there. So that's ideal for what I want. And so with this, just get a small amount in your brush, and then it's a matter of looking for those sharp edges. Now, often you'll be able to approach them using the side of your brush. So for example, the barrel of his PPC just here, you can just skim along it with the side, and this way you get a nice highlight appearing on that edge of some brighter silver. Same on the LRM launcher here. Again, we can approach with the side and just skim our way around it, but you won't always be able to access a detail in this way because it might be hidden away, or the line might be a little bit shallow on the edge. So in cases like that, for example, this panel edge just here, just angle the model so you're painting downwards towards yourself and just follow along either side of that edge there. So again, on his gun down here, you can see we've got these panel lines around there. To emphasize these, we just want a line following along that edge. So very carefully, this downwards sort of motion like that on either side to get a highlight on that detail. So this is going to be for all the silver, including all the mechanical parts and the internal structure. So just keep an eye out for all these little areas, look for those edges and just gently follow along each one. With that, the silver is highlighted, and you can see it gives a nice bit of definition to the silver metal, and then if you want to, you can do the same thing on the red. Now, we do already have a highlight on the red from that dry brush, but if you approach it just like we did with the silver, with this fine edge highlight and the exact same technique as what we did previously, so again using the side of the brush here, you can see it just gives a slightly sharper finish to those areas. So if you just want to finish it off a little bit more, then just work your way around the mech looking for those sharpest edges and following this technique just to pick them out. Remember, wherever possible, use the side of your brush, which sometimes means really turning the model around at some quite strange angles. But if you can't reach those little details in the more shallow areas, so example around here, remember just to turn it so you're painting downwards and just do this downward motion just to get a highlight on those edges. I finished applying that edge highlight to the red, and you can see whilst it's not strictly necessary, it does make that armor much sharper, so it is a nice thing to do if you've got the time to do it. But with that done, what we're now going to move on to doing is some smaller details in the miniature, which will help give it a sense of scale, and hazard markings are a great way of doing this. And in this miniature, we're going to be going for two different colour combinations here. First of all, we're going to do some that are white and red, and then we're going to move on to ones that are yellow and black. But we're going to be starting out with the white and red ones, and for this, first step is to paint in some white stripes where these markings are going to go. So for this, what you need is a pure white. Now in this case I'm going to use White Star, which is one of our paints, but any pure white will do. So for example, you could use something like matte white from the Army Painter. The choice really is yours. But with this, what we need to do is to paint in some bands of this colour where we want the markings to be. So you just need to get some onto your palette, and you can see I've got some here already. Thin it down as ever with that touch of water so it's nice and smooth. And with this, what we want to do is just paint in a fairly broad stripe anywhere you want the markings to be. And for things like this, think of areas that are going to be hazardous on the miniature. So moving joints, that sort of thing. So a great example would be on the back of the legs just here. You can see there's all these pistons and things around here. So I'm just going to look for areas around here where I can do this, such as along the back there, just near the angle. In this case, all I'm looking to do is to paint a stripe on here. Now, it depends on how it's comfortable for you to do. In this case, moving in this sort of motion, I find quite natural and comfortable. And you can see my hands are really braced, they're nice and steady. But turn the model as you need to. It's often quite easy just to turn it on its side. So you're going like this and painting downwards, kind of like how we did with that edge highlight. In this case, again, it's just a matter of looking for where you'd like the marking to be, such as along here. Just painting that downward stripe there like that. Now, if you do make any mistakes, don't worry about it. It's very easy just to go back to Sunz Scarlet to neaten back up again. I've painted on some white bands onto the miniature. You can see I've got some on the front, on the arms, and also some on the back. And once you're happy with those, the next thing to do is to start putting the red stripes through them. Now, you can always come back and add more later if you want to. But once you are ready for those red markings, what you need to do is go to Sunz Scarlet. So the same shade of red that forms the mid-tone of the armour. Because using this, what we can do is quite easy just start striking through these white lines to get the little bands that we want. So all we need is some Sunz Scarlet, still using that small layer brush, and just make sure you really get it nice and thin on your palette. So down to about there. And just make sure there's not loads on your brush as well. So just use the palette as you need to remove excess paint. And then with this, what we need to do is put little bands through at about 45 degrees from the horizontal on them. So if we go to this one on the back of the leg once again, in this case, what we're looking to do is to start in the middle. So always go for the middle of them first of all. And at about that 45 degrees, just bring that line through with that one downward motion and just widen it out to around about that point there, like that. Now, once you're happy with that, all you got to do is just skip along a little bit, roughly the same distance as to how thick that is, and then just start putting on another one there like that, and the same on the other side. And there we go. It's as simple as that. With the bands applied, there we are. We've now got the red and white hazard markings appearing on the mech, and now we can add some yellow and black ones as well. And this I'm going to be applying more on the jump jets on the back, but also on the main weapon too. And for this, what we need to do is to start out with a yellow that covers very well. So Averland Sunset is perfect for this. And then what we need is a pitch black. And here I'm going to use one of our paints once again, which is Doom Death Black, but any pitch black will do. For example, matte black from the Army Painter. But first of all, what we need is Averland Sunset, and to apply it, I've got the small airbrush once again, and the actual technique for this is very, very similar to what we did in that previous stage. There's just a little bit of neatening up that we need to do at the end of this. But first of all, we need to put in the yellow stripe where we want these markings to be. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be looking around at the jump jets initially, and so all we've got to do is just angle the model so you're comfortable and then apply them where you want to be. And I'm looking for areas just directly underneath them really, so this sort of area just here, and it's just a matter of carefully painting that band in. With the yellow stripes applied, we're now ready to move on to black, and here I'm using Doom Death Black. And what we want to do with this is apply it just like we did with the red earlier on, starting in the middle at about 45 degrees and gradually building the colour up until you're happy with the thickness of it, so about there. Then move along the same sort of distance as the thickness of that stripe and then add another one. Now you can see here I'm going a little bit onto the red, but don't worry about that. We'll show you how to easily fix that up in a moment. Then once you're happy with that black, we're ready to neaten things up. So for this, all you got to do is return to the colour of the armour, so Sunz Scarlet in this case, and just gently use that just to work away at the black where it overlaps a little bit to get a nice neat line where the yellow and black meet the red. And there we are, the hazard markings are complete, and you can see by keeping those lines thin, it really does help suggest the scale of the mech. And with that done, we're now going to move on to a really fun stage, because now we're going to paint the canopy glass on the cockpit. And for this, what we're going to go for is a kind of golden yellow sort of colour. And the first stage for doing this is actually a little bit weird, because we're going to start out by base coating all of it with a really dark red. And so for this, I'm going to mix one. What I've got is Doom Death Black, though once again, any pitch black will do here. And then what you also need is a dark red. So for this, I'm going to use some Khorne Red. And the first thing to do is to mix that on the palette. And you can see I've already got some of the Doom Death Black just there. I'm just going to get some Khorne Red and start putting them together. So roughly 50-50. It doesn't have to be exact at all. We just want to get a really, really deep red colour. So sort of like that. Now, once you've got that mixed up, it's just a matter of base coating the glass. So we just need to thin it down as ever and make sure the brush isn't overloaded. So there we go. And with this, we're just looking to base coat the whole thing. So if possible, leave just a little bit of the black showing around the outer rim from that wash that we did early on. So really what we're looking at is painting the middle all around here on each pane of glass. With that dark red applied, the next thing we're going to do is go right to the other extreme and apply our bright yellow on there, and then we're going to start working the two colours together. So for this, what we need is some Yriel yellow, and to apply it, again, go for that small brush, so still using the small layer brush. And this is quite a weak paint, so we are going to have to do 1 or 2 coats of this, but don't worry about it. The important things to do is just make sure you apply each of those coats thinly so you build up a smooth finish to it. So all you need to do is bring it to about this sort of point here, and then with this, on each pane of glass, we're looking to paint a kind of L shape in the lower left-hand corner. So in this case, I'm looking at around here, looking at painting it kind of downwards on this side just there. And then we want to go along the underside, so kind of along there like that. Now this line can be fairly broad, so just work it out. You can see it's a bit translucent too, so I will be applying 2 thin coats here, but you just want to kind of build it up to around about that thickness. Once you have that yellow in each pane of glass, the next thing to do is to start to blend these 2 colours together. And to do this, what we're going to use is some Skrag brown, but at the same time, we also need to have that Yriel yellow usable and also the dark red mix, which is why having a wet palette is so useful in a case like this. It is possible to do it using a normal palette, but it is much harder. So definitely use a wet palette for this if you got hold of one. But what we need to do is create the mix, first of all, that we're going to be using, which is just Skrag brown on its own to begin with. And with this, just need to get some ready on the palette and thin it down as usual. Now for this, I'm still using my small layer brush, and you can see on the palette, I've made sure to position it next to the other 2 colours that I'm going to be using, which I can draw from as we go along with this. But we're going to start out with Skrag brown on its own. And with this, we're looking for a thin coat that kind of overlaps the 2 colours. So if we just start up around about the top left here and just bring it down over that yellow ever so slightly, so you can see it's quite a thin coat of this paint, then just bring it down across that transition and close to the top right hand corner, but not quite into it. Now, when it's applied thinly like that, you'll see it dries pretty quickly, so we just need to let it fully dry there like that, and then do a second coat in the exact same way, which will make that colour a little bit stronger and start to ease the transition. So there we go. And then just let that one dry just for a moment. And then we can move in for a third coat in the same way. Now, once you reach this stage, it's a little bit patchy, but we have got the main colour sort of blocked in there now. So what we need to do is ease the transition on the 2. So that's why I've still got these paints on the palette. I'm just going to get a little bit of that dark red, mix it into some Skrag brown, so I get a darker version of it just there. And with this, what we can do then is, again, make sure we apply it thinly. This is going to be towards that top right corner where we meet that darker red colour. So kind of there like that, easing together. Then quickly straight to Skrag brown and take it a little bit further than that. And then we start to get up to the yellow. Now, as we get to the yellow, what we need to do is draw in some of that Yriel yellow and do the same thing like we did with that dark red just then. So just add a little bit of Skrag brown to it so we get a kind of in-between colour. And then apply this where we're meeting that Yriel yellow further down. So kind of just there. And then quickly straight back to Skrag brown on its own and just take it a little bit further past that. So you can see this way what we're doing is kind of blending it together and getting that hint of that sort of yellow canopy just running across the glass like that. Now, if it's a little bit patchy, you can always go back and do a second go on it, and you'll find the second go it starts to really smooth things out and get that nice transition. But really it's just a matter of doing that, just playing around with it as you need to until you're happy with the effect. Once you have those colours blended together, we can then move in to finish off the effect. And for this, what we need now is Yriel yellow on its own, and then a pure white. So once again here, we're going to be using White Star. But first of all, we need Yriel yellow. And with this, what we're basically going to be doing is re-establishing that kind of L shape we had in the corner. So what we need to do now is apply it once again, but this time as finely as possible. So really make sure you got it under control on the palette. Still using your small layer brush, just really bring it down so it's nice and thin and that you haven't got loads on there. And with this, as neatly as possible, just apply a fine line towards that bottom left. So I'm going to start on this side, painting downwards towards myself, just looking for a narrow line just along there, and then one again along the bottom. And then finally, all we need is that pure white. So here I'm using some White Star, and with this, it's just a matter of putting just a little dot of this colour in the opposite corner from where we've been putting more attention with the yellow. So just there to give the illusion of it being glass. And with that, that canopy glass is complete, and you can see each pane of glass has been painted in the exact same way. And so now we can move on to the final detail of painting the miniature, which is going to be to put an energy effect on the inside of the gun barrel of a PPC. And for this, what we need is a deep, vibrant blue, first of all. So for this, I'm going to use some 1000 Sunz blue. Then we need to go very bright very quickly. So this is going to be followed by some Baharoth blue. Then finally, we need a pure white. So here, once again, I'm going to use some White Star. But first of all, what we need is that 1000 Sunz blue, and it's still a matter of using a small brush, so still that small layer brush. And with this, all we've got to do is base coat the inside of the gun barrel. So you just need to get a small amount of it ready, and then once you've done so, it's just a matter of painting this area. So in this case, we're looking at this little recess in here. Next up, we need some Baharoth blue, and this is just to go deeper inside the gun barrel, leaving some of that dark blue showing around the outside edge, so just a smaller circle in there. And then finally, all you need is a small dot of a pure white. So here, once again, I'm using some White Star, and this just goes in the very center of that brighter blue. And once done this, you're then ready to apply any decals you may want to put onto your miniature. And I'm going to put some onto this, which we've got from Fighting Piranha Graphics. And then after that, it's just a matter of basing your miniature. So then it's ready for the tabletop. And with that base now fully painted, this Battlemech is complete and ready to stride forward into battle in the name of House Karita. So as you've seen, painting a mech in this colour scheme is very straightforward, but remember to look for those opportunities just to give that sense of scale with all those hazard markings, and also remember that the canopy is a real focal point of the miniature, so take your time when you're painting this detail. But other than that, have fun painting your mechs, and we'll see you again very soon.